Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MindsetGo radio show. I'm your host, Mark Altman, and happy to be with you here on a Thursday afternoon, here with my special guest, Nolan Ryan. And I know, before you say anything, I know it is not the pitcher who threw 7 no-hitters.
Unfortunately not.
Nolan, you're a really impressive guy, but you're not the pitcher who threw 7 no-hitters. But with that said, let me tell our listening audience who he is. He is a commercial real estate specialist for one of the most well-known commercial real estate firms in the region, Glickman, Covago, and Jacobs. He's an entrepreneur that has already started his own business. And, before I welcome him to the show, I have to tell our audience, Nolan, how old are you?
I'm 22.
22 years old. And the reason why I wanted to have him on the show today is he really is wise beyond his years on a number of topics. And we got in a very long, interesting conversation the other day about emotional intelligence and various other things. And I'm like, I got to have you on the show, Nolan. So, Nolan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So today, Mindset Go radio show is about, Nolan, it's about communication challenges in the workplace, at home, and school. It's about using emotional intelligence, multi-generational intelligence, and conversational intelligence. But today, we're going to talk about the concept and the pressure and the mindset of proving yourself, okay? And so I got to share with the group with the audience, that this is a very meaningful topic to me because I grew up in a household where both my parents were successful entrepreneurs. My oldest brother was valedictorian of his high school class, went to an Ivy League school, and now has his own psychiatry practice, very successful. My middle brother was number 2 in his class, went to Brandeis, and not only is has his own family medicine practice as a doctor, but is a very successful teacher and mentor at Tufts Medical School. So I'm growing up in this environment, Nolan, where I have
a lot of successful people.
A lot of successful people. And so let me tell you what I said to myself. Here's my inner voice, Nolan. This is the truth. I said to myself, well, I'm not going to get any attention and recognition by going that route. So you know what I'm going to do? I'll show them. I'm going to prove myself because all the feedback I always received is I'm great with people. I like dealing with people. I have entrepreneurial tendencies. So I'll show them I'll be more successful than all of them. And then I go to school. I love sports. And I was good. I wasn't great. I was good. So. Didn't make the varsity teams, and so knew I wasn't going to go that route. So I said, I'll show them I'm going to be a little bit good at all the different sports. I won't be great at any, but I'll be able to say I can play any sport.
I've done that as well.
Right?
I've gone into that. Yeah.
Right? And then finally, the third prove yourself mindset I had was because I didn't think I could compete in the business world with my knowledge, I decided to become obsessive about watching news shows and reading news articles. I'm going to show them. I'll show them just how smart I am. And so this is a mindset, Nolan, I grew up in, self-created, right? Because I didn't feel like I was good enough, felt like I always had to prove myself. And before I turn it over to hear your story, we talked in our conversation the other day about this mindset of proving yourself and how Tom Brady has used that as a chip on his shoulder throughout his career. I mean, this guy won 6 Super Bowls, been in 9, has convinced himself that as a 6th-round pick, his job could be taken at any time, so he walks around feeling like he constantly has to prove himself.
It's incredible.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to talk about today. And Nolan, from your perspective, I know if you would share with our listeners, you shared a story of your prove yourself moment, so to speak. And if you could talk to our listeners about that.
Absolutely. I want to draw another kind of similarity that I have to you
Please.
In that sense where, so I grew up in a family with phenomenal athletes. I think I was the only brother out of all 4 of us that was not captain of at least 2 teams in high school.
Wow.
So that was another kind of shot to me that didn't sit very well when it comes to proving yourself. But my experience in track and field kind of stems again from I'll try the big sports, and if I'm not as good as that, I'll go into some of the more unique things. So I got cut from lacrosse my freshman year of high school. And I was, safe to say, distraught. It did take a great emotional toll. I did not do well with the news. But my mom...
Well, wait. Can I interject and ask you a question about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you say you were distraught, were you distraught because you had such an intense passion for lacrosse, or were you distraught because of knowing your brothers and who was going before you, or both?
It was the second. I mean, it was a little bit of both. I obviously liked the sport, and I did enjoy playing it, but it was more of, oh my God, what am I going to tell everybody now that I don't play lacrosse for a team that I really anticipated playing lacrosse for? And so my mom, credit to her, she recognized that if I let it get to me too much, it would really hurt me. So she pushed me. She said, you know what, next Monday, I want you to just show up to track tryouts. I was like, all right. Like, I gave her a little resistance, but I did. I showed up. And to my left, when everybody was warming up, was these separate groups of people, and they were had these massive, long poles with them. And I was like, what the hell is that? And so I walked over and I talked to the coach about it, and eventually I worked my way onto the varsity squad in my freshman year and became a Division I pole vaulter after that. So
let me interject again, Nolan. So you taught your mom basically said, get back on the horse.
Yep.
She had the mindset of getting back on the horse. Prior to that moment of shifting from lacrosse to track, was that a mindset that you had anyway? Was that a mindset that your mom kind of instilled in you at that time? And
she definitely instilled it in me. I mean, I was more like, oh man, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Should I practice more lacrosse? I was just kind of caught drifting in the wind in a sense. And that was one of the real moments where she kind of stepped in and said, this is what you got to do. And this is how you handle some of these situations in life.
And so did you feel like at that time when you made the varsity track team, right, was that your prove yourself moment, or was there something else that you still hadn't felt like you had proven yourself at that time?
I mean, I definitely think that the freshman year was great, but I think my junior year when I came in like 5th in states or something like that, I think it was 5th. And that was definitely like, okay, like I've really solidified myself in this new role as a person that I'm really comfortable, and I've put a lot of hard work into it and seen some rewards. So I think it started my freshman year, and it kind of was solidified my junior and senior.
No, let me ask you, you shared a story about football, which I'll get to in a minute, but there's an expression that it's a strong expression, but I think there's some truth to it, and that is comparison is death. And,
absolutely.
Right? And so, when the concept of proving yourself, you were trying to prove yourself against your brothers,
yep.
Consciously and subconsciously. I was trying to prove myself against my family. Are you different now? Do you, as you think about proving yourself, as you think about measures of success, how big of a role does comparison play in that now?
It plays some level of a role, but it's the dynamic in which I compare myself to. I no longer try to compare myself to anybody else. What I try to do is compare myself to me and say, either was it yesterday, what did I do right, what could I have gotten a little bit better, and I try to hone in really for me on the details. For a long period of my life, I was like, you know what, I've got to, change dramatically, make all these drastic changes, and that never works. And so, and I do it in a variety of different ways in my life, whether it's my diet or it's my cold calls. I used to have a sheet of 50 cold calls, and I was like, I got to make all these a day. Now I'm more, okay, let's break these up. Let's make 5, 6, 7 a day, so that's more manageable. And so it's really comparing. I try to compare myself against previous versions of myself to get the best version of me out, really.
And do you keep, I mean, this might be a silly question, Nolan, but I mean, are you keeping actual metrics of what that previous version is, or is it kind of in your head and you have a general idea?
It's kind of in my head, but honestly, I've thought about trying to start keeping some metrics. I know when it comes to like lifting and working out and things like that, I do keep some metrics in the sense of like what I can physically do, just because I think it's easier in that sense to be able to quantify your progress. But
so when we come back from our first break, we're going to continue this conversation. Nolan, I want you to be thinking about how you were able to make the transition, because it's not as if you wake up one day feeling like you have to compare to your brothers and the next day you know you don't need to compare yourself to anyone. What were those moments that allowed you to shift your transition, shift your mindset to make that transition? When we come back from our first break, we'll discuss that.
Awesome.
This is Mark Altman for the Mindset Go radio show. I'm with my guest, Nolan Ryan. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Mindset Go radio show. And again, my name is Mark Altman, founder and president of Mindset Go, where we help people become more confident and effective communicators. I am here with Nolan Ryan from Glickman, Covago, and Jacobs. And Nolan, I want to pick up where we left off. And I want to ask you, for a 22-year-old guy to have the mindset of not feeling the need to compare to anybody else is pretty rare. And how were you able to make that transition?
I think it's harder in our generation, I think, than a lot of other generations that come before us. And that's partly just due to, I think a variety of reasons. I think social media plays a huge role in that. So that was one of the things that I immediately started. My social media presence is almost none. I haven't posted on Instagram in definitely over a year, I think, too. And I think that it really stems from the idea of understanding yourself, being comfortable with yourself, learning about yourself and what motivates you and what makes you happy, and then being able to improve upon those skills, ideas, and values. And that's kind of where I started from.
Actually, no, I think that's actually somewhat amazing, because it never occurred to me until you just said it. The fact that you've created a culture for yourself where you're avoiding is maybe too strong a word, but you're staying away from social media, and which is all about comparison. Mm-hmm. I mean, especially when you look at Facebook. I mean, Facebook is
Well, Instagram, I think, for
on Instagram, you're right,
is probably the most prevalent in that sense.
So, the fact that you have made that realization about whether it's Facebook, Instagram, anything like that, and I know, Nolan, you had shared a story with me, if you don't mind just briefly elaborating on. One of the big moments in your life that has shaped a lot of your habits and behaviors today was your experience in the football team in high school. And if you wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I played for St. John's High School, which is a local team around here. I believe it was 2011 through 2015. I was a fairly good athlete in the sense I did Division I track and field, but I did not really have a great high school football career. And at the end of, I think, the last game or something like that, I took off my helmet. I was in the locker room, and the only thing I could really think of was, wow, this did not really go the way I wanted it to go. And I didn't get a lot of playing time. I didn't, one of the things that was big for me was being able to play with my brother while he was there. I didn't get to do that. And so I felt like, to some degree, I let him, myself, and a lot of my goals down. And when I really kind of analyzed the situation, I came to the conclusion that it was really because I took a lot of things for granted and I didn't work as hard as I probably should have to earn that spot on the roster. And going forward in my life, I kind of made a promise that, this feeling sucks and I don't want to feel like this again. I'm not necessarily scared of failure, but I don't want to be the reason why I don't succeed anymore.
Yeah, but you told me that, your habits and behaviors now, where you really work incredibly hard, you go, I hate to use these cliches, but, you're going the extra mile, you're putting in the time, and part of it is because you don't want to go back to the feeling that you had.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? But we talked about that, one of the things we talked about the other day is that it is that, but it's also you might not have it's one thing not to go back to that feeling. It's another thing to be able to discern between hard work and the baggage of the emotions that went into that, correct?
Yeah. That is absolutely correct, yeah.
So, Nolan, I want to reference back to what we were talking about with Tom Brady because, this show so far, we're talking about the negativity that goes with proving yourself and having to compare and seeking others' approval and so on and so forth. But Tom Brady would argue that chip on his shoulder has been a boon for him and has been really I think he's 42 years old. At 42 years old, still working just as hard. So do you find that you use proving yourself at times as a motivator?
Absolutely.
And how do you use it as a motivator?
I mean, I love to take on new challenges, and I love to be able to kind of expand my knowledge and mindset and skill set. And so in everything that I do, the first question I ask myself, will the future version of me thank me for doing these actions? And so that's the first thing I ask myself. If the answer is yes, then I usually do it. And so that's kind of how I'm very future oriented in that sense. And I want to be able to earn everything that comes my way and not have it kind of haphazardly happen. I want to feel like I'm to some degree in control and understand the circumstances that are happening in my life, and that I'm able to affect it and influence it through my own hard work and the situations that I can create for myself.
So Nolan, let's take your job at Glickman, Covago, and Jacobs. I mean, you're a young professional, and you're relatively new to the commercial real estate field.
Yeah.
So how does the need to keep your job, to prove yourself to the principals of the company, how do you think that influences your behavior and your mindset, for that matter?
It's integral to kind of my behavior and my mindset. The way that I look at it, in order to kind of prove myself, I need to be able to provide a substantial amount of value, not just for my own business, but to everybody's business. And to be able to provide, honestly, some intangible aspects of, when I look at the younger group of people that are there, I think about, just, I don't want to, community might not be the right word, but just a sense of we're in this together, and, some thought leadership in some areas. But, I really try to take the approach that you always have to be a student of the game, whether it's real estate, football, anything. And so I definitely take that approach when I'm around the partners, and I show them that I'm paying attention, that I'm willing to learn, and that I want to learn, and that this goes beyond just a job for me. It's something that I truly enjoy as a person, and I have really enjoyed the process of learning and getting better.
So Nolan, it sounds like what you're saying is that one of your core values of wanting to learn, your intent on showing that to the partners of the company, showing them you're paying attention, that you want to learn, and things like that. But you're actually making an assumption. Those are your core values. They happen to be my core values as well. But with that said, that might not be what they want to see. As far as we're a results-driven society, that.
Absolutely.
So when you look at what you have to prove, part of what your behavior and habits are up to this point are what you think would be important. But what are you doing, and do you know what they want you to do to prove your worth and value? And if so, what is it?
Well, the first thing I always do is ask.
Okay.
I always ask Jim, what else do you need me to do? What else would you want me to improve on? Where do you see my progress happening the quickest, the slowest? I mean, that was part of some of the questions that we typed up when we worked together. And so for me, again, those are my core values and my focus. But whenever I don't know what they're thinking, I tend to just ask and try to get to the point as quickly as possible so that I can help the solution.
Nolan, do you know what you just made like a really simple question? I ask, what do you want me to do? What do you need from me? Whatever. Do you know how many people are scared to ask that? Like that question. And why? Why do you think, Nolan, that is such a fear for people?
Well, I think to ask that question, what do you want me to do? It opens you to a little bit of vulnerability in a sense where you're not sure. And you're expressing that you're not 100% sure what you should be doing. But I think, and this is how I've always put, if I had somebody working underneath me and they were constantly saying, look, I don't have anything to do, but like, I'm willing to help you. What do you want me to do? I would appreciate that. And I would want to work with somebody who is constantly trying to help the, organization, themselves, and me.
All right, so Nolan, let's pretend I had your mom here. And I said, Mrs. Ryan, how many times when Nolan was in high school did he walk around the house saying, Mom, is there any extra chores I can do? Is there anything extra? How many times would you say you did that?
Little to none, I would probably say.
And how come, do you think?
I think it was because I wasn't intrinsically motivated to do those chores.
Right. So now you bring up intrinsic motivation. And so, Nolan, when we come back for our next segment.
I think if you ask her now, that would be a little different.
Because?
I think I think my values to some extent have changed. For instance, I clean my room at least 2 times a week now because I need to be clean. I like to be clean. I like to be organized.
Okay. So we're going to expand on that because when we come back from our next break, this business of asking, how can I prove myself? What would you like to see happen? What can I do to help? Like this mindset, to me, is the way to go. But in most people's eyes, there is so much downside to doing that. And we're going to get into more detail. We'll talk a little bit more about intrinsic motivators when we come back. This is Mark Altman for the MindsetGo radio show and my guest, Nolan Ryan, commercial real estate specialist and budding entrepreneur. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the MindsetGo radio show for part 3, and hope you're having a wonderful Thursday afternoon. And listen, we are all about, emotional intelligence, multi-generational intelligence, 5 generations in the workplace, and conversational intelligence, which is knowing how to have the multiple types of conversations that need to be had. But one thing we're about at MindsetGo is wellness, and I hope you all are finding some work-life balance in your day, something that Nolan and I are striving to do a better job of. With that said, Nolan, I want to go back to where we were, and, there are 2 things that happen if you take the risk of asking, do you need any help with anything, as an open-ended question, or what can I do to help? Mm-hmm. One of them is you're going to be asked to do something you don't know how to do. And that is very scary for people because they don't know, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the skills. They're going to have to do research. Heck, they might not even know the process to figure out how to do it, for that matter, right? Yeah. So there's that. Yep. The other big problem is it could be a time suck. It could be something that they need to do that could distract them from what they really want to be doing or feel like they need to be doing. And so when you put that question out there, you're overcoming those fears because your core values are so strong. And what I really see is that you have this innate ability to see the big picture. So where does that come from? I mean, it's so hard, I think, for people in their 40s and 50s even to see the big picture, never mind at 22. So how is that so innate for you?
Well, I think it comes from 2 things. One, whenever I ask somebody for help, especially at Glickman Kavako, I trust that if they're going to have me do something, whatever it is, it's going to help me and it's going to build my skill set and it's going to be worth my time. So, whenever I approach Jim, Mike, or Pete and say, what do you need me to do? I never worry that they're going to just give me some, project that I can go in my cube and burn 8 hours on. And another thing is I always want to learn and develop skill sets. So the idea that I don't know how to do something, that I need to figure out a process, I have a lot of fun doing that. And I enjoy building up my skill sets and figuring out how to accomplish new tasks and becoming a better professional and really getting better at my job. And so the magic word in what you just said was trust, right? You trust that they're going to help you grow and that whatever they ask. So are you the kind of person where you give people the benefit of the doubt, you trust them until they show you they can't be trusted, or is there something that people typically need to do to earn your trust? I try to give people the benefit of the doubt for trust. It's obviously there are some circumstances that I come into and I'm like, oh, all right, well, I'll see how this plays out. But for the first time, I always usually go with whatever they say, and I always choose to trust them. If it's kind of something where I'm doing a repeat task and I start to question whether or not it's worth my time, I then like to have just a conversation with them, and that's more of, hey, I'm interested in why you're having me do this, and to see the bigger picture around it, because I'd like to see how all of this kind of what I'm doing contributes to the whole of what everybody's trying to accomplish here. And so if they can't give me an answer in that process, that's when I guess the trust might start to fade. But I really do try to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Nolan, you know what just occurred to me as I was listening to you? I was thinking about some of the decisions you've made in your life and some of the choices you've made. And you're talking about, you're a guy that loved to play sports. Mm-hmm. You're a guy that has chosen a field where you're doing sales. Yep. And your entrepreneurship, which is certainly involving growth and sales. Those are all 3 of those things inherently require you to prove yourself daily.
Yes.
Right? Because if you don't, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, depending on how bad it gets. So had you ever thought about the fact that the choices you've made all surround being, because let's put it this way. I mean, there's plenty of professions. I mean, there are plenty of professions. If you're a doctor, you could have a bad day. You could have a few days. You're not going to lose all your patients for a bad day. If you're a teacher in school, you could have a bad week. In some cases, you're tenured. I mean, there's a ton of jobs out there where if you don't perform at your best and you don't continue to prove your worth, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You're not choosing anything like that. Have you thought about that?
I have, and I think it's honestly, I enjoy being a high performance executor. I enjoy having to pay attention to the details, to dot all my I's and cross all my T's. I enjoy that process of making sure what I've done is the best work that I can do, and putting my best foot forward at all times. And that's why I think I have such a gravitation towards learning, because when you learn, you're able to, make sure that all of those details fall into place just a little bit better.
Well, I'll tell you something I realize, Nolan, is that, in the profession, and I obviously I'm in sales, and I love playing sports, and I'm very competitive. But I'll tell you, I think I chose a profession where really, even more so than in sales, my livelihood really rests on proving myself every day. Mm-hmm. I did a training yesterday for a manufacturing company, on giving and receiving feedback. And I was driving home yesterday, and the training went well, and it looks like I'm going to get them as a client for next year. But I was driving home and thinking, that was my first engagement with them. I had 90 minutes. This is what I have to do, Nolan, in 90 minutes. I have to build rapport with everybody in the training.
Yep.
Because the assumption is that the feedback that those people give to the powers that be are going to impact their decision to use me moving forward. I have to prove the value that I'm adding some kind of tools, strategies, techniques, so when they walk out of that workshop, they feel like they're smarter than before they went in. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about the fact that 90-minute performance by me, authentic, but if I don't do what I need to do to prove my worth, that could cost me anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 in a lot of cases if I'm not on my game.
Yeah.
And, obviously I don't want to go into a training thinking that, because that's going to create pressure and impact, and I don't. But when I think of whether I'm coaching a client, whether I'm consulting for a company, whether I'm training someone, the need to prove it's not even a choice. Like, it's just something that's part of the environment I have to do. And I got to tell you, whether you're conscious or subconscious of the pressure, it's there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, and especially when you're an entrepreneur, and you have other people that work for you at the company, but ultimately the decisions
come down to
you. So I want to shift to entrepreneurship for you. You're a budding entrepreneur. You've kind of, over the last year or so, I believe, started to dip your toes in. Yeah. Talk about proving yourself as an entrepreneur. Do you feel like you have to prove, aside from you, are there people that have been around you, mentored you, that you feel like you kind of want to prove yourself to? Where does that fit in as entrepreneurship?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the area where I feel like I need to prove myself the most when it comes to being an entrepreneur is anybody who's willing to give up some of their free time to advise me. Because I look at that and say, all right, they're getting nothing back, so intrinsically they want to help. So in order for them to do that, and I want to make sure that it's worth their time.
Yeah, but you just said it. You just answered your own question. They're getting intrinsic value by helping you, aren't they?
You would think and you would hope, but for me, I don't like to. I always like to say, if you're going to work with me, that I'm really working on something that I'm dedicated to and I'm passionate about, and I want to see succeed.
So Nolan, here's the problem with what you're saying. I think that, and I talk to a lot of people about this, is you're setting yourself up to fail, and here's why. Because you're wanting to give back to the people who help you is wonderful, but A, have you asked them how you could give back? And B, what would be enough? Is it being successful as an entrepreneur? And if so, what defines that? When do you reach that crescendo where you're like, okay, now I feel like they would be proud of me and I've given back? Like, have you thought about what is that measure?
Yeah. I mean, one of my advisors, I did ask him a question. It wasn't phrased exactly like that, but
Yep.
it was more of like, his name's Taylor, and I said, Taylor, I'm genuinely curious. Why are you helping me, and why do you think that I'm kind of worth your time? And his response was, well, I think your business model and what you're trying to do and promote is something that needs to be done and will have a positive effect on society, but I don't have the capacity to accomplish it myself, so I want to empower somebody else to. So for me, in my eyes, as long as I continue that message of what I'm trying to do and promote within my business is succeeding, which is healthy local food and reducing carbon emissions and being smarter about how we use some of our real estate and around the central Mass and really anywhere, but then I've succeeded. And if I'm not the one to accomplish that, but I, give some of my knowledge to somebody else, then I think that I've been successful in his eyes as well.
Yeah, I understand, and I think we're going to go into our final commercial break before we come back for our last segment. But when we come back, we're going to talk about two things. One is what I'm going to refer to as the nebulous zone, and two, we're going to talk about knowing yourself, as you alluded to, Nolan, earlier in the show. The way you don't need to compare and the way you don't need to prove yourself to anybody but yourself is to know yourself. Mm-hmm. Know your own standards, core values, things like that. So we're going to talk about that in our final segment. This is Mark Altman for the Mindset Go radio show. So Nolan, I want to get back to the concept of proving yourself. We've talked about the comparison element. We've talked about emotional baggage and human baggage. But there's this thing I call the nebulous zone. And what I'm speaking of is not really having specific metrics or ways to prove yourself. It's you want to prove yourself, whether it's to a human being, to other people, or yourself, but you didn't really give yourself a barometer too. It's just open. It's just vague.
Yeah.
I want to prove to everybody. I'll give you a perfect example. I've said it. My first business I was able to grow it to a multi-million-dollar business and sold it. So you know what I say now, Nolan? I say I need to prove it wasn't a fluke or a one-off. Mm-hmm. I need to prove I can do it again.
Yep.
But that's the nebulous zone, because when I say I need to prove I can do it again, does that mean I can build another successful business? Does that mean it has to be a multi-million-dollar business? I haven't made any specific rules for myself. And I think that's what I mean when I say the nebulous zone. If you don't give yourself the rules or the measures, mm-hmm. it can really be harmful, because nothing will ever be enough and you can't ever be satisfied.
Yep.
So I think that's a problem with that.
Oh yeah, and that's definitely something that I toggle back with, or all the time, as to what is really enough for me. Is it, do I need to work 12-hour days, 13-hour days? Where is that zone of, you're accomplishing what you need to accomplish and making progress that you intrinsically feel good, but you're not pushing yourself to the point where long term you have burnout, or you're not able to accomplish what you want.
Yeah, and I think you just said something. I think part of the challenge also in proving yourself is we get so focused. I'm going to go the other way. Now, let's say there could be a nebulous zone, but there could be actually specific measures. But the problem is we get so focused on proving ourselves and hitting those numbers, or hitting the make-believe numbers, that it does cause burnout, and it does cause physical, mental, and emotional issues. And look, this phrase, Nolan, keeping your head down, sometimes keeping your head down, keeping focused, keeping your eye on the prize, not letting outside distractions, that can be a good thing.
Yeah.
But in many cases, it can be a bad thing, because you lose sight of the bigger picture, which is something that's been a strength for you. So I want to finish the show on a final concept today, and that is probably the biggest part of proving yourself at all, and that is your own self-esteem and self-confidence, and knowing what are your standards, what are your core values, to know what is enough, to have a template of success, to know when you've achieved what you wanted to achieve. There are so many phrases, Nolan, out there, such as work-life balance, that they're just so ambiguous. Mm-hmm. And so, you talked earlier in the show about a core value of learning. So what are other standards or core values that you personally have that are aligning your expectations to proving yourself?
That's a good question. Core values and morals, huh? Well, I've always just thought that the number one thing that I need to be, especially when you do business, is be as genuine as possible. And that's really key for me. And I think that's why I've been able to get a decent amount of traction in my career, is because I try to be honest and upfront and as trustworthy of a person as I possibly can. If I think something's a good idea, I'll tell you I think it's a good idea. If I don't think it's smart to do something, I'll let somebody know. Even if it's not something where people want to hear, I still try to at least let them know, if it's my job to, that, hey, I don't think this is a good decision, or I don't think it's a long-term move.
So let me give you a scenario, Nolan. My question for you is, tell me someone right now in your life that you think is better than you as an entrepreneur or in business. Anybody.
I think you, for
one. And why do you say that?
Well, I mean, you've been there and done it multiple times. You've said you've grown a business, you've sold it. You're phenomenal when it comes to managing people and understanding what you can and can't get out of people in a certain moment, and being able to grow and develop somebody. And that's a quality and skill that I really admire in you, is your ability to develop somebody. I think that's underplayed in our society, and especially in our work society, that I think more people should be commended for their ability to develop people than natural talent in just a raw circumstance.
So Nolan, but what you just said, and just so our listeners know, I just slipped Nolan a 20 for giving me all those compliments. I know you can't see it because it's radio, but I just want you guys to know that. No, all kidding aside, but it's interesting, Nolan, all those compliments you gave me, you don't necessarily know if you aren't as good as me in some of those things, because you really haven't been put in a position yet to do some of the things I've done. In all fairness, right?
I suppose in all fairness, yeah.
Right?
That is true.
And so the reason why I named the company MindsetGo is I'm a big believer in mindset. Mm-hmm. And when we compare ourselves to others, I think there's 3 buckets, right?
Yep.
First bucket is I haven't had the opportunity, so I don't really know if I'm as good as that person. Second bucket is I have had the opportunity and I haven't done as good of a job, right? And the third bucket is I don't want the opportunity, and I'm just going to admire that person for the different skill that they have. But the point I'm trying to make is, the second we put people in a higher spot than us in a point of comparison, again, it could be used as a benefit as a motivation to grow. But I want to give you the flip side of it. Now tell me someone that you're better than.
That I'm better than.
Yes. And you don't even have to name a name. If you don't want to name a name, but name like a friend, a family member. Like, you can just be vague. But is it a friend?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple friends that I have that, when it comes to emotional intelligence and being able to stay calm and just, handle yourself in a more polite and professional way, I think I do a little bit better job than them. In that sense, I think they let some of their emotions get to them. And it causes them, I think the interesting thing is they get pretty insecure in some situations. And when people are insecure, they tend to lash out in a sense to make themselves feel better.
So the funny thing, Nolan, about core values and standards is, the reason why I just took you through those 2 questions is because in most cases, if I was to say to someone, tell me some of your core values, I don't care what age they are, people actually struggle to answer the question, because it's just not something people think about a lot. You just do it. You live it. You experience it. But what's interesting about it is, usually people's core values are made up of the things that you admire in others that you don't have, and the things that you take pride in that you're better than others.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And it's kind of interesting. You don't really think of it that way, but for our listeners, as we wrap up the show today, the message I'm trying to give you is, as you evaluate when you have to prove yourself, how you have to prove yourself, who you have to prove yourself to, think of the things that you admire in others. And remember, if there are skills or qualities or characteristics that you admire in others, before you say you don't have them, understand if you've had the opportunity to demonstrate them. And on the flip side, if there are skills that you cherish and relish that you're able to do that many others can't, then remember that when you think you need to prove yourself and you start to question your confidence and self-esteem, don't forget to count those things, because those things are standards and are core values that are really important. And so I think ultimately, Nolan, we really barely scratched the surface on this topic, but your standards are really the standards that matter. And it's okay to admire people. It's okay to respect people. It's okay to use proving yourself as a motivational tool. I'm not even saying not to do it. But if you don't have a template for your own best self and what makes you valuable and what makes you good and what makes you worthy, then nothing else really matters, because nothing will ever be enough in that case.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
So, Nolan, thank you so much for joining us on the Mindset Go radio show today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And I know you have you're starting to prepare for spring training in the off season, so there's a lot of work to get to there.
Yeah, I got to loosen up the arm.
Nolan, I got to ask you one really quick last question before we go. And I can't remember if I've asked you this before, but were your parents baseball fans? Was the name Nolan intentional?
My mom was not really aware of it. My dad definitely knew about it.
Okay, so
and so yeah,
Okay.
I think he snuck one in there.
All right. Well, Nolan, thanks again. We will see you next week for another edition of the Mindset Go radio show. I'm your host, Mark Altman, and thank you for joining us.